Hi, Sophie here with my one and only interruption during this episode. That's right, we were so on point that I don't have to keep stopping the podcast to talk about Reborn. Which is why Sin has sent me a note asking me to explain Reborn before the podcast starts in case anyone is new. Reborn is an incredibly generic shonen anime about a kid who finds out he's the heir to a mafia dynasty, so the mafia dynasty sent babies to look after him. One of them is there to encourage him to try harder by shooting him in the head, and the other is dressed as a cow. On with the podcast.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone. And welcome to the Snack Covenant, episode F1.
What? Are we using X now? I already don't like where this is going.
You must have a lot of questions. You know how we're remastering older podcasts?
Yeah?
Because we have better equipment, we have notes, we have pixels.
Mm-hmm.
So, I noticed that episode 1 of the Snack Covenant needs to be remastered. The problem is, Sophie, we can't remake episode 1, call it episode 288, not have an episode 1.
We had episode 288 already, it'd be 289. I'm keeping track of this.
Anyway, we cannot do that because we're not going to have an episode 1, and it's going to be really confusing.
Got episode 0.
We had an episode 0.
Oh, we did, didn't we? Yeah, the origin.
So, we thought up of a new remake system.
No, you thought it up. Not a we.
Well, we were there, Ebruitus was there, Nostradamus was there, Natalia was there, Sophie from the Notes of Sophie was there. I'm sorry you missed the meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
What I'm saying is that, from now on, when we remaster an episode that actually exists in the Snack Covenant universe, we're gonna take that episode number and put an F in front of it.
Why F?
The Russian F.
Did you call it like X1?
No, because Russian F has significance in the Snack Covenant, Sophie. This explanation went on for way too long because Sophie kept interrupting me. Do you understand the remaster system, Sophie?
I understand what you want to do. Higher quality Snack Covenant F series.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's not for Force Femme?
What?
Force Femme?
What's that?
That's what I did to myself.
You see, F is very, flexible.
Even flexible starts with F.
Oh my god!
So do other words I'm thinking right now.
Today we're going to talk about Bloodborne.
Oh. Isn't this the first of our exciting F series?
Yes. Now, the Bloodborne story itself is pretty straightforward. You go to the mysterious city of Yharnam for a medical procedure, a blood ministration. During the ministration, you become branded with a magical rune called the Hunter's Mark. From that point on, whenever you die, you get brought back to life. And with that newfound immortality, under the guidance of Gurman, an old man who lives in another dimension, you explore Yharnam and you do all sorts of exciting stuff. Like, you meet interesting people, including a man wearing a gramophone. You kill beasts, you kill gods, you uncover an ancient ritual, you save a baby. And by the end of it, you either get the Hunter's Mark removed and go back to your regular life, or bring humanity into the next stage of evolution as a squid.
Yeah, that pretty much.
But Sophie?
Yes?
Since you're a PhD doctor, you see deeper meaning in things.
Did you ever notice how the hero and the villain are actually very similar? Sorry, can't help overthinking things.
So today we're going to talk about themes of Bloodborne that we talked about off camera.
Yeah.
So Sophie,
Yes.
themes of Bloodborne, go.
Themes of Bloodborne. You summarize Bloodborne Story quite simply. And the thing is, like, on our channel, we have a slightly more in-depth one that's all of 5 minutes long that actually does pretty much do the whole story. Like, the story of Bloodborne is incredibly simple. And I've talked a bit about this before when people are confused by it, and the answer is basically that, like, it is structured like a mystery. You are stumbling upon events after they have happened, and the thing that caused those events will be at the end of the area. And if you understand it that way, like, it makes sense. So a good example of that is, like, throughout the game you hear a child crying. You're not sure why that is, but then at the end of the game you find the child who has been crying. There's a ghostly woman that you encounter occasionally. She's not given any context. But then if you go and do a bunch of optional stuff that you can only do after you meet her, it becomes apparent who she is. So the whole game is kind of structured like that. All the Souls games kind of do this. You were thrown in the deep end and you had to contextualize what was going on as you were doing it.
Right.
So that gave them this impression of, like, well, this is very complicated. I don't understand what I'm doing. But, like, once you actually just sat there and broke it down, the stories are not that complicated. They're very, very basic. Bloodborne is actually probably the most straightforward one, but it's also the one that has the reputation of being, like, the strangest, like the hardest to sort of comprehend. And that is not down to the linear, like, narrative structure of it. It's not down to what you're doing or why you're doing it, which are always very, very clear. It's down to, like, it just goes to a bunch of places that people sort of, I think, weren't expecting it to go to. And a lot of the parts of the game that you play through, they're not actually necessarily part of the plot. There's areas in the game that are entirely optional. You don't have to go there. But what they'll do is they'll just fill in some details about the world. And things like the enemy designs and, like, the designs of the clothing, the designs of the areas that you go through, they are all filling in all these little details about the world as you're going through it. And they're all connecting back to a series of, like, themes and ideas the game is touching on, and it's using these areas and these enemies and these fights and everything to articulate those ideas. But the way that the game engages with these ideas is not like a sort of soapboxy, like, didactic way of doing it, where it will say, like, here is a thing and it's good for this reason or it's bad for this reason, and, like, really hammer it home. It will just sort of explore it.
Thank you, Sophie.
So, Sin, I want to talk to you now because, like, you've been on this journey with me for almost, we're going to 5 years this year, actually.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, like, you were someone who I met because you were very, very into, like, Bloodborne Story and Bloodborne's world, and you wanted to know more about it, so you came to me to answer the questions. But, like, what was it about, like, Bloodborne specifically that made you ask me those questions? Like, made you want to know more? Because, like, you'd also played Dark Souls 3 at that point. You played Dark Souls 1. I don't know if you played 2.
I don't think so. I don't think I played 2 yet.
Yeah. But, like, Bloodborne specifically was like, this is the one I want to know more about. Like, tell me more about this. And, like, something that's come up repeatedly through this, like, 4.5-ish year thing is that, like, there'll be a question about Bloodborne asked, and it will, like, lead off in a whole lot of different directions that are all, like, they all have their own questions.
Mm-hmm.
But they're, like, sort of worthwhile questions that tell you things, rather than, like, this just doesn't make sense, which I think is the attitude a lot of people had to it initially. Something we brought up, like, a few times, actually, is because the game explicitly quoted Lovecraft. What we've said repeatedly is, no, Lovecraft, like, for all his faults, of which there were many,
Mm-hmm.
he is writing stories that are, like, they are stories that are about things that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the same thing as a story that doesn't make sense. But because of that particular read of it, there was this sense that, like, well, Bloodborne, it's like giant air quotes Lovecraftian. It sort of is and sort of isn't. Because it's that, therefore, it doesn't make any sense. And like
Mhm.
when it would invoke something like the Formless Erden, great one, or like the doll or something, that was just sort of there. Like they was just like, what does it mean? Who can say? And he's like throwing random words and characters around for no reason. And I think what we have done through like going over this ground over and over again is to point out like, no, everything in this game, even the stuff that was like added very, very late, the stuff that is like on a like linear like constructed narrative level actually makes very little sense, like the least sensible stuff in the game. Like the stuff about Ligarius is an obvious one. That stuff, like, yeah, it doesn't really work narratively, a lot of it, like in terms of the structure of it. Like you won't actually know what order things happened in, it's not clear. But it's all there, it's all still serving a function. Something that's come up like through the data mining that's been going on, which I've been involved in, and the like sort of cobbling together of like old drafts of the story is that what really seems to have happened in Bloodborne is that they started with a very straightforward story that is basically the story that you told us. And then as they sort of worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, they started noticing like themes and ideas in the story that they maybe hadn't realized were there yet, and they focused on them. The thing that sort of like holds Bloodborne together is that like maternal aspect. The story's all about like children, and it's about motherhood, and it's about like motherhood is a bond that like people who have this completely rational view of the world can't understand. That whole thing looks like it came very late in the day. And that is why a lot of like just the assets in the game that are related to that, like the third chords and like the Queen Yharnam character, they seem unfinished. And like they literally are unfinished and like just kind of cobbled together. Like again, as someone who's done like real deal data mining of this game, Queen Yharnam, when she first appears to you, that model has assets attached to it that are called ASDF, ASDF, ASDF. Because it was just like, fuck, get this thing done. Because like it was not there until very late. And that whole like vista you see of like Queen Yharnam atop this like red lake as the moon is descending and a child is crying, which is like this incredible, like, there's no way you can't look at that and not see it as like this is like a whole like pregnancy, menstruation, motherhood thing. That whole scene looks like it was made about 3 months before the game actually came out.
Wow.
So it's this sense of like, yeah, but all of these like images and ideas and things, they came later on. It seems like what they did was they focused on those and they focused on bringing them to the fore, if that was sometimes at the cost of like, actually now Kanehurst makes no sense because we've moved all these things around. So getting back to you, like Bloodborne specifically got to you. It specifically got to me too. So I want to know like what it is about it that got to you, that made you like decide to like find some rando on Reddit and just like grill them.
Well, as you know, I love horror, I love action, I love mystery, but I'm not necessarily into books and stuff. Before playing Bloodborne, I didn't actually know who Lovecraft was, and I didn't actually realize that the whole cosmic horror type thing that you find in horror movies was inspired by his work. And I didn't actually know anything about Bloodborne before playing it because I didn't know what Bloodborne or From Software was before my boyfriend told me about them.
Yeah, fake gamer girl.
So it was just a whole lot of unknown being thrown at me, and I wanted to know more about it. And I think about Bloodborne, the way it's made. When you start playing the game, it's just a werewolf action game or whatever. And it's really cool and it's really interesting. But once you get to a certain point where things start to get crazy, you're kind of like, wait a minute. What is the red moon? What is this ritual? What are these monsters? What are these gods? What are these great ones? Why is there a baby? And you keep playing the game to try and figure out what's happening because in the end you think, well, at the very end, when I beat Gurman's gonna be like, you have defeated me. Let me explain to you everything that just happened in this game. as like a final
Yeah.
half an hour cutscene.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that didn't happen.
No, but like when you finally played Metal Gear Solid 4, you were so happy with that like 80-minute long ending that introduced new characters after the game was over.
Thank you, Sophie. So when I played Bloodborne for the first time, I felt I missed the entire game.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like most people, I went online, I read about it, I watched YouTube videos, and it still felt like something was missing. I felt like there
Yeah.
was an itch I couldn't scratch. Like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I missed everything, but that's not what I missed. I didn't miss the fact that, Gascoigne is the father of these two girls and his wife Viola
Are you
is
saying
dead.
Gascoigne is the father of Gascoigne's daughter?
Yes.
This is. Oh my god.
So you know what I mean? I didn't
Yeah,
miss
yeah,
that. I
yeah,
didn't miss
yeah.
that Eileen is hunting the hunters because, they hunted a little too much and now they're bad.
They're bad.
You feel like you
Yeah,
missed
yeah,
something more.
yeah, yeah,
So when I stumbled on your channel, that's the stuff I was missing. And that's why I messaged you on Reddit to ask you all those questions when I realized who you were by accident. Because I'm
yeah.
like, okay, this person gets it. This person is thinking what I'm not thinking, but I want to be. So what drew me to Bloodborne, it was the horror aspect. It was the mystery aspect. It was the cosmic aspect. But it was also the emotional aspect. The fact that each character in Bloodborne seems to have a story that's like relatable. Like we talked about Maria.
Yeah,
Well, maybe
yeah.
like going into the fishing hamlet and massacring people is not necessarily relatable, but the fact that afterwards she's like full of regret and she wants to like atone for her sins and all that stuff,
That's
that's
very relatable.
that's very relatable.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like what I was getting at with like it not. The whole Maria situation is like it doesn't end with like. By the way, this is like how things turned out for Maria.
Hmm.
It's not like you see like Maria's spirit ascending to heaven, and she's like,
Yes.
"Thank you, I am redeemed now." It's like
Yeah.
the way that she like survives is she just sort of like a fragment of her lives on as something else that doesn't remember being Maria.
Yeah.
It's this thing that's like, well, maybe what she did was so terrible that there's no coming back from it.
Hmm.
But like, despite that, she's not completely evil because she understands what she has done and she's tortured by it. So it's like, it's not a neat resolution.
Yeah. It's like the characters in Bloodborne seem so human.
And that's really impressive considering she has like 2 lines.
Well, like four.
Yeah, 4.
Thank you. Another character that's really interesting, I think, is Lawrence.
Yeah,
Because it's like, you fucked up so much, bro.
yeah,
What are you gonna do about that? Well, there's no limit to how much damage I can really do. So again, it's not like we meet Lawrence and he's a little bit evil, but then he goes through a transformation, a character arc, and at the end he's like, I understand what I did was wrong. And it's not like Reborn, basically. Despite being the opposite of Reborn, it's still good.
yeah.
But in the end, it's tragic.
This is something that Miyazaki does, and I think it's very like interesting and it's not remarked on much. Is that he views everything from outside. But in viewing it from outside, he actually allows like you to he allows you to humanize the things that you're watching because he's not actually judging it.
Yeah.
He's not saying this is how the person feels. He is showing you what has happened. He is showing you like the impact that it has had. And like he doesn't therefore need to say like Maria is racked with guilt.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he just and it's like, well, I kind of know what she's doing because of what I'm seeing, but like that is I think why it has attracted so many like fan artists and fan writers because if he had actually written like and directed a whole lot of cutscenes of like young Maria and young Gurman first meeting,
Hmm.
it wouldn't have been as effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that drew me to Bloodborne is that Every character seems to be alive, seems to have their own life and meaning and point, and you grow incredibly attached to them.
So, like, that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying that it's like that stuff, it's in there, but it's not talked about. That's not because it's like, oh, I'm shying away from it by like, I'm talking about it, but in the background, or like, it's there if you want to see it. It's actually more like, it feels empathetic and it feels humble to say, like, this is a thing that happens, and I feel quite strongly about it, but at the same time, I am not going to presume that I would actually understand it if I talked about it. So you're given, like, the superficial details of something in a way that feels like you're actually watching this happen to a real person in a way that actually doesn't feel superficial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I remember talking about this with Jeremy Greer, like, very, very long time ago, about Gurman,
Hmm.
and about how, like, Gurman is kind of an exposition dump at points in the game.
Hmm.
Like, he says, hey, I'm going to explain what you have to do.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like, his own character is not laid out to you. He doesn't say, by the way, these things happened to me and this is why I'm sad. You just see, like, this is a traumatized person. And you get little glimpses of that because, like, when he's on his own, like, and he's sleeping, he's talking in his sleep and he's, like, crying and stuff. And he's deliberately being very distant from you. He's saying, like, just don't engage with any of this. This is what you have to do. Focus on the mission. Don't think about anything else, because he's someone who went through that and he's trying to save you from going through it yourself. So it's like, it's how you would actually interact with someone like that in real life, because in real life, people don't like dump their entire life story on you the first time you meet them. And Gurman has that line at the start everyone quotes where he says, like, don't think too hard about this, just go out and kill a few beasts. Gurman fucking went through this. And he was completely traumatized by it. He did terrible things, and he lost everything. He lost, like, the person who, possibly the only person he's ever actually cared for. He is sort of reduced to this state where he is just the servant of someone who is dead and he doesn't realize they're dead. He sort of is mumbling, like, he clearly feels like very impotent. He feels like everything is, like, lost to him, and he's just this, like, sort of husk that is waiting for a chance to finally do something that is never going to arrive because of what's happened. That's why he's saying, don't think too hard about this. If you think too hard about it, you will end up like this. Something else that's, like, interesting that it does is, like, the characters in it have done terrible things.
Hmm.
They also have trauma from that, but it's not like they did something terrible, but they're also sad about it. So who can say who's right? Like, Maria Gurman, like, tragic, horrible story. They still did a genocide.
Yeah.
The game is not shying away from the fact they did a genocide. It's not like, well, they've learned their lesson now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a case of, like, on a cosmic level they deserve this, like, this is their just punishment. It's like this is the mess that they made and they've ended up in it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's interesting you say that, because it's not like on a cosmic level, after Maria killed everybody in the fishing hamlet, Ebrietas descended and she was like, Maria, I disown you. You cannot enter cosmic realm or something. No, it was just
Yeah.
Maria killed a lot of people. And she herself, as a human, feels horrible. She realizes, like, what she did was messed up and now she has to atone. Like, Ebrietas doesn't care. Moon Present doesn't care. There's no cosmic being telling her it's bad.
Yeah. And because of that, there is no actual end to the atonement.
Yeah.
Because no one's ever going to come down and say, okay, you did it. She's just there forever with herself. And, like, the whole, like, arc of that character is, like, she realizes she's done something terrible. She throws the weapon away that let her do all of that. And she dedicates herself to healing people, because clearly she believes that, okay, if I just protect people from now on, if I just, like, make everything better, that will make up for it. But, like, it ultimately doesn't. Not because, like, it has a morality system that's saying, like, you have to have done this many good things, many bad things. It's just like, well, she did that and she can't live with it. It doesn't matter what else she does, she'll never live with it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing about Maria is that despite knowing what she did was horrible, and despite atoning for it, she doesn't really want you finding out about it.
Like, that's a really common thing, like, in Souls games as well, and particularly in Sekiro does it as well, where it's like, this is my mission, I have to do this thing, and it doesn't matter if I think it's right or wrong, I have to do it, I don't have a choice.
Hmm.
So Maria's literally like, it's better that I kill people than anyone finds out what we did.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your take on Ludwig?
I guess, like, we've talked about characters having, like, different dimensions to them.
Yeah.
Ludwig seems like he was always a prick. Ludwig seems like a character that exists to prove a point in the story rather than, like, be related to.
What kind of point?
Because the point of Ludwig is, like, so there's this recurring, like, motif in Bloodborne of, like, the healing church who, like, typically are scientists. Like, this is another thing that people sort of miss the first time because they have the word church in their name, ignoring that they have a laboratory. But, like, they were scientists, and they, as far as Bloodborne's world is concerned, they were kind of on the cutting edge. Like, they were very advanced. Like, they're advanced of, like, Victorian scientists slash mystics. And something that, like, they keep doing is they keep coming up with all these ways to fight beasts, and all these ways to fight infection, and it always, always, always ends up not working. But there is a solution.
Is the solution hiring Elizabeth Holmes?
Be about as useful, to be honest. And the solution is that they go back. They go back to something older and something that they actually don't understand. And that ends up being the solution. So, what happens with Ludwig is that the Healing Church initially have this, like, fairly small, covert group of hunters. They dress in, like, what would be for the time modern clothing, like the long sort of, like, overcoats, and they dress like they're in Brotherhood of the Wolf. They dress like they're steampunk con people. And they have these, like, cool, like, explicitly, like, this is technology, these transforming weapons that have all these, like, gears and things in them that, like, can change configurations that are actually very intricate pieces of engineering. And that's not enough. The beasts can't be stopped by that. So what they do is they start employing this other group of hunters who are way more militaristic, and it makes this clear they are knights. They employ these people who are essentially medieval knights. They dress in this, like, heavier armor. They wield, like, very large, like, they're not special, like, intricate church weapons. They're just like a hammer or a sword. Like, yeah, they have transformations because you can, like, plug them into each other, but if you compare, like, the church hammer or the Kirk hammer, whatever you want to call it, that's just a sword with a bit of rock stuck to it, as opposed to something like the threaded cane or the saw cleaver, which has these, like, actual mechanisms in it that make everything, like, flip out and change shape and stuff. So that's who they end up using to fight the beast, and the leader of them is Ludwig, and Ludwig, he comes across as he is someone from, like, he's like a knightly hero. He's actually kind of like someone you'd meet in Dark Souls. He's this sort of, like, poster boy. And his weapon that he's using to fight the beasts, it's not even something that the Healing Church made, it's something that he found. Like, they went into the catacombs below Yharnam and he found this sword that when he picked it up, it glowed with this unearthly light and started to talk to him. And there's nothing fucking scientific about this. This is not something anyone can rationally understand. But that is the thing that ends up saving the church, at least for the foreseeable future. That's what ends up saving them, is like, okay, we just went back in time. We basically got a knight who belongs 400 years ago, and he's got a magical sword no one fucking understands.
Hmm.
That's what's going to stop the beast, and it actually does stop the beasts for some time. But then ultimately, like, he just becomes blood drunk like everything else, and he transforms into, like, an absolutely horrific, like, monster that loses all of its humanity.
And, like, thinking about it, especially his first phase, is one of the most horrifying things I've seen in my life.
Yeah, yeah. Ludwig is interesting because, like, he's the inverse of Gascoigne. Because Gascoigne starts off as a human, and then the halfway point is he turns into the beast. Ludwig starts off as a beast, and you basically knock sense into him.
Yeah.
It seems like what actually happens if you look at the cutscene is you hurt him, and the sword falls off his back, and the sword is actually what reawakens Ludwig's consciousness.
Yeah.
So you end up with this horrible horse monster with 8 legs, but it's standing upright and it is acting like it is a very sort of noble knight. It is doing these fancy sword moves, and it's doing this sort of praying stance with the sword and everything, but also it's it looks like a pile of guts with a horse head on the end of it.
And it's so amazing. It's such a juxtaposition, I guess.
Yeah, and even the head is it's half and half. He actually has it's half a horse head and half a human head merged together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I mean. Ludwig is a character who exists to make that point about the church and that point about beasthood, rather than be someone who you really I know a lot of people who think Ludwig is cool, but I don't know anyone who's crying over the tragedy of Ludwig.
And as you say it, and I'm thinking more about Bloodborne, it's such a big world despite the game being rather short.
No, but that's another thing that we keep running into, which is you'll ask me a question about one thing, and it will bring in 5 other things because everything is connected to everything else.
Yeah.
Nothing in that game actually stands alone. Everything has had some form of relationship with probably 3 or 4 other things. In Bloodborne, it's tell me about old Yharnam. It's okay, how long do we have? Because that brings in things from the Grand Cathedral. There's stuff from the Chalice dungeons. There's the beast blood that ends up in Forbidden Woods. There's the powder kegs who are connected to a guy who's in the nightmare. All this stuff about why the Healing Church did it, why the Red Moon happened. Is this where Lawrence went? This is also the Red Moon happened because they had the child of the Vile Bloods from Castle Canehurst. It's this giant spider's web of
Yeah.
all of these things interconnecting with each other, which makes that area seem massively complex. But if you actually just zoom out, it's this is an optional area that takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another character I actually really, really like, and I think is the coolest one ever, Queen Annelise.
She's cool. I like her. You can kill her and she doesn't care. It's the ultimate I'm not mad.
Yeah, you cannot live rent-free in her head.
Yeah. That's why she's a queen.
That's why she's a queen.
But Annalise is another good. Everything's a good example, I guess. But we talked about sort of things in the game being moved around and changed and stuff in a way that brought thematic stuff out, but maybe messed up narrative structure. And Annalise is a really good example of that because Canehurst got gutted. They ripped so much out of that place, it makes very little sense now, and yet it still functions thematically. There's still a reason that place exists. It's still saying things and filling in little gaps, and it's articulating things other areas don't articulate. Again, just going back to this whole motherhood, pregnancy, betrayal, the way in which people who try to relate completely rationally to everything can't understand parenthood and can't understand what it's like to actually have a child, and the way that they're willing to work with people who they don't like because they both have the same end game. That's all in there. And even Alfred, the one kind of NPC other than Annalise who's connected to Canehurst at all, it's this one guy who's really doesn't do very much, but what he does is significant, and it fills in all the stuff about how the church is recruiting people and the sort of things they're telling people and how people rationalize what they're doing and all this other stuff in a way that I don't want to keep bashing on Dark Souls 3, but Orbeck of Vinheim, remember him?
No.
He's a guy and he's in it, and then there's a reference to him being an assassin, but he never does it, and then he dies. And I know a bunch of people who like him because he has a sexy voice, but if you think about how, like, fully formed Alfred is. Like, he has an arc and the arc articulates something.
Could you elaborate on that?
So, like, Alfred is a character who, like, when we meet him, he says, like, oh, you're a hunter, that's how I started. And he has a lot of sort of fervor to him. He's very, like, passionate. And the more that you talk to him, and he doesn't even say that much, you have to just sort of, like, prod him a little bit. He's like a Healing Church fanboy, and he knows all the stuff about the church, but then the more that you prod him, the more it becomes apparent he didn't learn this himself. This is all stuff that he heard.
Mm-hmm.
And he is absolutely obsessed with this guy called Marta Ligarius, who it becomes clear very quickly he's never met Marta Ligarius.
No.
And everything that happened with Marta Ligarius that Alfred is talking as if he is an expert on.
Yeah.
That happened a very long time ago. Alfred probably wasn't even born when it happened.
Nah.
But Alfred is so obsessed with it. The second you show him something from Canehurst, he's like, I recognize this. This is from Canehurst. I've heard all kinds of things. And he gets like this bloodlust in him immediately over someone he's never met and a place he's never been.
Yeah.
And like the whole thing is like, Alfred's never been invited.
No.
He's this guy whose his mission in life is to go to Canehurst. No one wants him there. And, like, our rando fuck from nowhere gets an invitation.
It's such a burn.
And then, like, when he goes there, he loses it completely. It's really getting at this thing where, like, Canehurst is a place that, like, I'm assuming bad shit did happen there. Like, it's a bunch of aristocrats who have, like, knights that go around killing beasts for them. They probably weren't the nicest people alive. Also vampires. Maybe some of that blood drinking not entirely consensual. But at the same time, like, they are still framed as the victims of what happened. But they're framed as the victims in a way that, like, no one actually outright says, church do bad thing in Canehurst. Everyone actually says the church did the right thing in Canehurst, but you have to contextualize, oh, they're saying that because the church told them that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not presented as, like, you meet someone at Canehurst and they're like, oh, let me tell you the truth about what really happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was this. Like, you actually just wander through this, like, this space and you realize, oh, this was just a slaughter. This was a slaughter, and most of the people they killed just seemed to be, like, random women who were at a library.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the one person that they came to actually kill, they didn't kill.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, Alfred is this, like, he's someone who's basically radicalized.
He's basically a zealot.
Yeah, he's a guy who's completely radicalized. He's radicalized into hating something he doesn't know anything about.
Yeah.
And that feeds into, like, Yharnam itself, which is, like, it is a place that even before the Healing Church set up and even before, like, the blood went bad was massively xenophobic. It always hated foreigners, and it just took one little thing to go slightly more wrong for them to just, like, we're going to pick up torches and saws and we're just going to kill anything that doesn't look like it belongs here. But again, like, because the game has this, like, constant sort of, like, it's not quite irony, but, like, this sense of, like, well, they're not, no one is entitled, no one does anything for no reason. That's sort of important, that, like, when they start screaming about outsiders ruining their blood, they're kind of right, because the Healing Church did that in the Healing Church Outsiders. So, like, it basically just took one group of outsiders to go wrong, which is based, like, again, after Yharnam welcomed them in.
Yeah.
For them to just, like, double down on, like, no, everything that's not from here needs to die. And we have to keep our blood pure by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, every story of these characters in Bloodborne, even if they're not terribly complicated, a lot of them really aren't. Like, Alfred only really shows up 3 times. Eileen only shows up, like, twice. 2 or 3 times, depending on how you interpret, like, the Henrik situation. But, like, these characters, like, even if the story isn't that complicated, it feeds back into the main, like, thrust of the stories. Like, Eileen is, like, there's 2 ways it can play out, but, like, her story either way is about, like, the more that you hunt, the more that you kill, the more that you slide over into losing your humanity. So, like, either way it plays out, like, either she kills Henrik and tips over, or she doesn't kill Henrik and someone else tries to kill her. But, like, that's not just, like, oh, Eileen's story, sad. It's, like, That's the whole city is people doing this. She's just an example of
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So it's like, it's very, very thematically consistent with what it's dealing with. Everything has a reason to be there, but often that reason is just that it reinforces a theme in the story. It might not actually, like, fill in, like, a gap you're curious about in the narrative itself.
One character that defied my expectations in terms of Bloodborne, though, was the Suspicious Beggar.
Yeah, he's a character who, like, I feel like a lot of other games would be a fake out. Where, like, you find this man, he is covered in blood, he is covered in, like, weird stained bandages, and he's hunched over a pile of corpses doing this very obvious eating motion. And
Yeah.
then when you see him, he's like, oh, I didn't see you there. Better be wary, there's beasts around. I feel like a lot of other games that would be a fake out, and it'd be like, you learned a valuable lesson today, not to judge a book by its cover, because that guy's actually really cool. In Bloodborne, no, he's just a fucking cannibal werewolf, and he'll kill everyone you care about.
Sophie, do the outro.
That was the Snack Covenant episode F1. You can press that to access the help menu, I guess. We talked about some of the themes of Bloodborne. Something that we, like, touched on a lot is, like, it's a very thematically rich and diverse game. So this was by no means all of them, it was just sort of off the top of our head stuff that, like, we wanted to talk about. We didn't talk about, like, the relationship between sort of attempts to understand the world empirically versus things you can't empirically understand. But that's something that, like, we'll definitely talk about a lot more. It's something we've brought up a bit more recently, but, like, something that happens a lot in Bloodborne is, like, this is where the Lovecraft stuff comes in. It's like, you encounter something that you cannot understand. And it's something that, like, it destroys your view of the world, and the way in which the characters in Bloodborne who, like, the reason that they lose, the reason that they destroy themselves, is that when they encounter that thing, their response is like, I have to kill it. Maybe not literally kill it, but maybe, like, dissect it, or, you know, take it apart and understand how it works in a way that doesn't threaten me. And the way in which, like, your character and other characters kind of ultimately succeed is that when they encounter those things, they think, I am going to actually attempt to grasp this, I will engage with it, and I will reach out and I will try to become, like, one with it, I will try to empathize with it, even if that process is massively, like, painful and that damages me in the process. And, like, I'm sure we'll talk about this later because this is the outro, so this can be another episode one day, but, like, I think that is the reason that, like, Bloodborne hits a lot of, like, LGBT people very hard, because it's a situation where, like, you're constantly being confronted with something that is maybe very scary, and you're frightened of, and your response, you know, initially probably is to try to, like, kill it, is to, like, push it down, or, like, go around it somehow, or, like, overcompensate by doing the opposite of what it's telling you, things like that. And then it ultimately becomes about acceptance, and I think that's why, like, it hits those people.
Thank you, Sophie. That was a beautiful episode.
Thank you, Sin. I've forgotten what it was about.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time!
Bye-bye!
Are they fucking still talking to Sophie yet? Oh, thank God. Hello, everybody. It's Hidetaka Miyazaki here, creator of Bloodborne and president of From Software. And I was listening to this podcast while I worked on my new robot game, and I have been waiting the whole goddamn time for this thing to end because they got something very, very wrong that I need to correct. At the very start of the episode, Sophie confused the Vongola and Bavino families in Reborn. Suna is the heir to the Vongola family, they're the ones that send Reborn, but Lambo is sent by the Bovino family as an assassin, although later on he does become the 10th generation Vongola Lightning Guardian. It's not like this is difficult to follow. It's not the profaned flame, which she also doesn't understand. So with that settled, it's apparently as the last person to talk on this, I have to thank everybody. So thank you to all members of the Snack Covenant, the Abruiduses, and the Dignity Cities. What the fuck is a Dignity City?